Bandcamp. See, being able to directly support your favorite artists is pretty cool. Being able to, quote, own your music is also pretty cool. Even though, if the artist deletes the album, it removes it from your library. And hey, designing your own webpage, that's also pretty cool. But, sweet Jesus, who uses this to listen to music? Like, oh my god, just look at this UI. Alright, fine, I'm being a little hyperbolic. It's usable, and hey, you can make playlists now, which wasn't a feature at launch, but whatever. I'm spoiled by Apple Music and Spotify for having usable UIs. I do, in fact, pay for music on Bandcamp, because of the aforementioned cool reasons. Sure, using it is a lot more cumbersome, but at least I can pay more than whatever Spotify or Apple's going rates are for royalties. I see buying an album on Bandcamp as a way of saying, hey, I really enjoy the kind of music you're making, let me just go the extra step and give you something that's a little more than 1/100th of a penny. But you know, on the flip side, I'm not gonna shame people who use major streaming services. I'm not gonna tell someone that they're not a true fan of someone because they didn't drop like $10 on a digital album. I personally think anything above like Bandcamp's default, which is $7, is kind of a scam, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, I usually buy albums on Bandcamp for smaller artists if I really like them that much. Then afterward, if they upload it on a major platform, I'll just put it in my playlist there. But if I'm being real, the only other big reason I'm doing this is because Epic Games just bought out Bandcamp. Wow, I can finally listen to my B-tier ambient music while playing Fortnite. Oh wait, it was bought out by someone else, and they also laid off 50% of their staff. Either way, I still have a lot of stuff in my Bandcamp library, so I thought it would be fun to give just small reviews to each of them, because I personally think they don't warrant a 10-minute video. Am I copying something that Fantano did like a decade ago? Maybe. Will there be multiple episodes of this? I don't know. But this time around, I'll just be focusing on electronic music I have. So this album was recommended to me through one of my Synthony review videos, so whoever sent this to me, thank you very much. Fever Dream is a pretty short drum and bass EP that, for the most part, consists of what I call playlist fodder. It's not an album that serves to be one cohesive experience, it's just a collection of tracks that sound similar sound-wise. That's not to say that the material on here is bad in any way, shape, or form. The tracks Fever Dream, Disconnect, and Don't Ask fall under the wider umbrella of melancholic and, dare I say it, depressive breakcore, but they do enough to keep my attention at least. I really like the guitar that's played on Fever Dream. I feel the song could have just been longer in general, and the guitar just have more interesting parts other than that one main section and the solo at the end. I'm kinda wondering if it's a sample or not, or if Fiend is really shredding like that at the end. Blessings, Morrissey, 2DF2, and Disconnect are remixes of the following tracks right here. My favorite one here is definitely the JPEG Mafia remix. The tracks Don't Ask and In a Place Where No One Speaks are kind of the odd ones out, because one of them is a drum and bass and house fusion track, and the other is a down-tempo trip-hop kind of track. I am a bit more partial to A Place Where No One Speaks because I'm kind of in a trip-hop phase at the moment. I wish I could say more about this EP, but it's just done so quickly that people, myself included, are still waiting for this guy to drop. Especially so because this is his only release in 6 years. If you do decide to buy this, it's worth whatever penny you want to give it. There isn't a set price. I'll let you know that I'm not a super big fan of Vaporwave or the whole Slushwave movement. You can go to Pat Chennington to get your fix on that. I snagged this album while I had a subscription to the Geometric Lullaby Bandcamp page. Did you know Bandcamp had subscriptions? That's crazy. I'll have you know that my dumbass was trying to secure a $70 Sewer Slut test pressing, and then canceled my membership immediately after I took the L. But don't worry, I definitely did download a lot of albums from that subscription. So Mindpring Memories is an alias of Angel Markloyd, who also has a lot of other side projects. If I'm being real, the only thing that really caught my attention looking at this album is the concept. Now, Vaporwave isn't a stranger to weird concept albums. You can experience radical craft store ambience, or relive the morning of 9/11, for whatever reason. But hey, you can get it on the cassettes and vinyls, so it has to be worth something, right? Anyway, this nearly 1.5 hour long album is prefaced by a couple of paragraphs that set the tone for the album. It goes a little something like this.
Everything is online, literally. Life and death, experience, existence, all spiritual realms, all metaphysical activity. The internet is everything, all-encompassing. Energy, thoughts, emotions, coded in binary. The womb and the graveyard. M, the ultimate desktop. L, a complete reformatting. Overwritten in infinite passes. The ultimate desktop. Aka Dreamland. M 2.0. Intra-universal binary. There was once a time everything died but the souls, and the nothingness became a purgatory by default. No connection. The internet birthed the place they could spend eternity securely.
Okay, are we done now? Good. I'll admit, it's an interesting read. The song titles did correspond to the pretext, so I guess the album has some direction. It also gaslit me into thinking this would be a good album. So what do I find interesting here? The first thing that really caught my attention was the guitar solo on Return to Heaven. I usually expect Vaporwave to be a bit more calming or dour, but this had this strange, triumphant feeling to it. In fact, a lot of the songs here have this triumphant and heavenly feeling. If the songs weren't doing that, it was really kind of stripped back and more aligned with traditional vaporwave-isms. The album doesn't really have a lot of chopping or looping, seemingly just kind of relying on the various layers of reverb to carry the songs. Mind you, the effects being used are very lush and large sounding and sound really good in general. But because of that, I don't really know what else I can comment on. The fourth track, which the album is named after, is a nearly 17-minute trek through layers of atmosphere. The bass lines here and the solos in the original sample were really the only thing that really kept me present here while listening to this. Eventually, everything just kind of melded together, or slushed together, I guess. And eventually I just kind of started to ignore the fact there was even a track list. It honestly didn't change too much in mood and nothing really caught my attention. The music is just kind of there eventually. For some people, that's a perk. For me, that just puts me to sleep. I really don't want to be too harsh on this thing, because I realize that ambient music isn't meant to be deeply analyzed. The concept of the album, which kind of blends technology and spiritualism, is just kind of fancy set dressing for music with little substance, other than its layered use of atmosphere. It's a 6 out of 10 on a good day, and at the very least you could pay whatever you want for this album. Longsword is one of the many side projects by a dungeon synth and black metal artist known as Mist. I found out about Mist through his raw black metal albums under the Som project, and I just kinda had to know what else this guy has been up to. I don't have too many opportunities to talk about black metal and by extension dungeon synth on this channel, but I kinda want to, considering I do like both a fair bit. Mostly the raw sides, because I just love that low fidelity grit they're known for. This particular album and all of the Longsword catalog is focused on the medieval aesthetic in both image and sound. But unlike a lot of other hi-fi medieval dungeon synth albums, this one sounds less like it would appear in, say, Skyrim or Oblivion, and more like something you'd hear off an MS-DOS game or something. It sounds just super primitive and lo-fi. One thing that really caught my attention is the use of drum machines on this album. Percussion in dungeon synth albums in general are kind of a rare sight, so this is a nice change of pace. The title track has this galloping rhythm that I kind of recognize in some metal. The closest thing I could probably think of is maybe Iron Maiden. It's a bouncy and triumphant sounding track, which are also kind of rarities in dungeon synth. Speaking of metal, a lot of the arrangements here are ones that I feel could translate well into regular guitar music. Tracks like Cold Steel, Our Enemies Beneath Our Hooves, and Awoken/Midnight Ambush have this up-tempo punk feel to them. Bodies Burned on the Warfields and Gallant Stories of Victory could potentially fit on, say, a melodic black metal album. Even though Miss here is mostly a vocalist from what I can gather, his compositions are nutty, and the fact he did this all in one take is kinda crazy. I would definitely recommend this, but I wouldn't really recommend this over any other albums in his discography. They're all kinda enjoyable for the exact same reason. For me, it's money well spent. So this album here just kind of came out of nowhere. For transparency, I found this through an Instagram ad, so I didn't initially find this on Bandcamp, but fuck it, I want to talk about it. Anyway, for context, Nicholas Maisio is primarily a trained jazz guitarist. He studied at Berklee, and he also plays in a jazz band. His first album from 2021, Secrets from the Searchlights, is kind of a normal-ish modern jazz album. To be fair, I'm not super tapped into jazz, but it's about what I expect a jazz guitarist's music to sound like. The sound of 2024's non-standard, however, just kind of comes completely out of left field for him. Have you ever wanted to hear amen breaks over jazz guitar improv? Then this is the album for you. Listening to this album is kind of a trip because I didn't think these two things would fit together so well, but here we are. If this were just a standard liquid influenced drum and bass album, I'd just kind of be mildly impressed with the production here. Some of the production choices are cool, like the really jazzy chords and synth lines incorporated throughout, but the amens remain largely unchopped, so that's not really going to satisfy the Venetian snares fans in the audience. No, the main main attraction here is Nicholas, basically doing jazz improv for minutes at a time. A drum and bass rendition of Giant Steps has to be heard to be believed. It's just an onslaught of jazz riffs, and it's just the biggest highlight for me. I also really enjoy Stablemates and Blue and Green for the same reason. However, most of the album is kinda like this, so it might get repetitive if you don't really care about the technicality of the music. Most of the songs aren't super structured and just kinda rattle on and eventually just end. The track Break Chords is a small break from the intense improv and is a bit more of a mellow track, with just a bit more structure. The last track of note is Drywall, which has no guitar to speak of. It kinda ends up being the most boring track on the album by far because of that. It's just synth and a basic Amen pattern. Hey, but at least the ambient drum and bass fans will have a field day with it. For the first time around, I say it's a really interesting listen, but I don't know how much mileage you'll get out of repeat listens. My biggest gripe here, which keeps me from rating it any higher than like 7, is the fact that it doesn't really change much at all in terms of just jazz riffage, which makes it kinda stale. I don't think it's worth $10 though. I mainly listen to this thing on streaming services, so I say get a feel of it first and then decide if you want to drop money on it. I'm breaking my rules again. This was just another artist I found off the Instagram algorithm. It kinda seems like his music is a bit of a side project since this guy's content is mainly centered around roller skating. The music doesn't really intersect with that side of his content, but I thought it would be interesting to mention. For the handful of people who know about this artist, this might be kind of an oddball pick. This project labels itself as alternative goth, but it also incorporates a lot of electronic noise and industrial influences in the music, at least to the point where I feel he gets the pass for being electronic. In fact, this album kinda reminds me of Crystal Castles with the way they sometimes fuse elements of punk and electronic. I don't know how much of the production was handled by Ghost. Is this all original? Are these samples? Either way, the sound selection here is great. Ghost Boobs labels itself as a band, but I don't see any other members. Do you? Either way, the sound selection here is great. In fact, I feel the production carries this album heavily. The clearing has this harsh and bright synth melody as its hook, and it instantly grabbed me. It sounds like something I'd hear off some early 2000s racing game or someone's Neocities page. It's punky and synthy. Neat. Songs like Dumb, I'm Sorry Jimmy, and The Light follow this post-punk sound with a little bit of electronic sprinkled in there. Taito really leans into that electronic sound and gives me that Crystal Castle vibes I've mentioned, and the last track, Assume the Worst, is the most industrial sounding out of the whole project. But it also kind of manages to sneak in this little punk beat. But as much praise as I give the production here, the one thing that holds this album back in my opinion is the vocal performance. Like, the guy here is literally just mumbling. Not even really like melodically, he's just kind of like talking over the beat. Otherwise, this is a pretty good album. So I feel a good chunk of my previous viewers want me to talk a bit more about this project. I feel a lot of the hype here is shrouded in the question of, is this sewer slut or not? So I'll set a challenge for myself and talk about this project without mentioning them. Alright, let's go. Final Nail in the Coffin is the first full-length project by Agony OST. The last time I talk about this artist, I just kind of glanced through their music, and the closest thing I can compare them to is Burial.
Missing you, gonna be alone.
They both fall under this dark house/garage sound, and honestly I gotta listen to more Burial. I've only seen the studio albums. Anyway, I tried to look more into the history of Agony OST, but I couldn't really find much. They made one single before this, and that's pretty much it. They just kinda came out of nowhere. So I can't pad the video out by adding a lot of context, but hey, what do I think about the music? A general thing I like about this album is the great ambient sound design. The first track, Ordeal, is kind of an outlier when it comes to the other songs of the album. This has a bit more of a straightforward, like, rock drum beat, as opposed to the wonky sounding house drum loops that are all over this album. Combine this with the thicker ambient textures and it makes for an interesting listen. This seems more like something that would be on a shoegaze album or something like that. I wish it were longer and had more changes, but this is a favorite track of mine. The fourth track, Noah Rave Is This, is another outlier on the album. Here the drums are slower and the big distorted bass gives this track a large and lumbering vibe. Once again, another favorite of mine from this album. Other than that, the album kind of focuses on the garage sound more, and they all kind of just follow the same formula. A cool ambient melodic idea, wonky drums, and some kind of really ambient outro. They're not really bad by any means, but they just all kind of sound the same, structurally and sound-wise. The best one here in my opinion is All of That Is Beautiful because I feel it has the best sound design. And that's really what makes the bulk of this album. Cool sound design, and really linear arrangements. It's stuff to zone out to, which has its fans, but you know, it isn't for me. If you watch any of my previous review videos, these comments may seem very familiar. I wonder why. And yeah, this is kind of all I have written down. Tune in next time when I suddenly get the motivation to write another episode of this. Or not. It wouldn't be the first time I've axed off a video series just because I got bored with the concept. Well, I'll be seeing you then.